Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Forooshani and this is the third episode of our podcast about dissociative identity neurotype. If you have not checked the previous episodes of this series, you can check it through the links provided in the description. In this episode, we talk about how to support someone who lives with dissociative identity neurotype. In our previous podcast series about autism and complex trauma, we talked about various strategies and ways that we can follow to be more supportive and inclusive of neurodivergent people. Many of those points can apply to people with dissociative identity neurotype as well, because they also are emotionally sensitive people and have many trauma-related difficulties that we mentioned for previous types of neurodiversity. In addition, the comorbidity of dissociative identity neurotype and other types of neurodiversity like autism is not only possible but also common. In this episode, we specifically talk about some of the specific stigmas and misunderstandings about dissociative identity neurotype. Increasing our knowledge about stigmas and misunderstandings about a mental condition is always one of the most important steps to be supportive and inclusive towards people who live with that condition. So, for each mistaken belief, I first refer to the mistaken belief and then I explain the true information about that. Mistaken belief number 1. Dissociative identity neurotype is very rare. In our previous episode, which was episode number 2, we already talked about this mistaken belief, and with providing some research-based statistics, we mentioned that this type of neurodiversity is much more common than what many people may expect. Mistaken belief number 2. They are not in touch with reality. This is one of the most common misunderstandings about dissociative identity neurotype, which especially has become viral by some popular movies and TV shows. The writers or producers of these movies and shows obviously confused dissociative disorders with psychotic disorders, but the fact is that the vast majority of people who live with dissociative identity neurotype are in touch with reality as much as neurotypical people are. Mistaken belief number 3. Alternate identities are just imaginary friends that some kids experience in their childhood, or they are just voices in mind. In our previous episode, that was episode number 2, we explained the neurodevelopmental basis of alternate identities. It is important to note that each alternate identity has been developed almost in the same way that our brain normally develops our identity. The only difference for these people is that the brain has developed multiple identities instead of one identity. Alternate identities are equally genuine, real, and important in running psychological functions. They are not imagination or voices in head or delusions. Mistaken belief number 4. When you have a dissociative identity neurotype, you are highly likely to hurt people because of your aggressive alters. Stigma has mostly become viral by cinema and media over nearly a century. However, this does not have any root in facts. There is no scientific evidence or reason that can link dissociative disorders to criminal or harmful behaviors. Dissociative identity neurotype is a brain reaction to extreme childhood trauma. As we explained for the previous podcast about complex trauma, the victims of these types of traumas can be even less likely than the general population to be abusive or harmful to other people. Mistaken belief number 5. Dissociative identity disorders have not been scientifically approved as a valid mental condition. There are decades of robust scientific evidence from different scientific disciplines which all have confirmed dissociative identity neurotype as a valid mental condition and a type of neurodiversity. However, you may still come across some health practitioners who do not validate this condition. But keep in mind that this minority of practitioners are just sharing their personal opinion with you, not a valid professional opinion. Not all mental health practitioners are experts in dissociative disorders or experienced researchers in this area, and therefore their clinical knowledge can be just limited to the type of clients that they see on a regular basis. If a practitioner is not experienced in knowing about and working with a certain type of mental condition, it does not give them any right to invalidate that mental condition. If you are a person with dissociative identity and have any experiences of receiving and validating messages from a health practitioner, you have the right to officially report that practitioner to the relevant regulatory and monitoring agencies, like the National Psychological and Medical Regulatory Associations in any country. And finally, we finish this episode with 2 recommendations about inclusive and sensitive ways of communication with someone who lives with multiple identities. The first recommendation is to be sensitive and validating towards each one of the alternate identities. For example, when you are interacting with a certain alter, you need to use the specific name of that alter and consider the fact that this alter has an independent personality from another alter that you might have contacted before. For example, imagine your friend who is living with dissociative identity neurotype is a grown-up male. However, this person has an alter who is presented as a little girl. If you are communicating with the person when this little girl alter is in control, you would need to communicate with your friend as if you are communicating with a little girl, not a grown-up man. Remember that the personality, perceived age, and self-image of each alter can be completely different from the biological body. This point also implies that you would need to be very sensitive in using names and pronouns as well. For example, if an alter has a different gender identity, such as having a female character when the biological body is male, you would need to use pronouns such as she or her when referring to that alter. Based on several scientific research studies, the majority of people with dissociative identity neurotype have at least one alter who has a different gender identity than other alters or the biological sex of the body. So, if you are regularly interacting with someone who has multiple identities, it is important to learn and practice gender diversity sensitive ways of communication. We also need to be sensitive and careful in properly using the names of the alters and how to refer to them. For example, this is a common mistake to use sentences like, "Hey John, yesterday when you were Abby, you were talking about that TV series." The problem with this sentence is that it would imply that you are considering your friend like an actor who were pretending to be a female character like Abby in that situation. In this example, the correct and validating way of communication is something like this. "Hey John, yesterday I saw Abby and she was talking about that TV series." When you paraphrase your sentence like this, you are showing your validation of another alter, and at the same time, you are also showing your validation of the person's gender diversity. The final recommendation is that don't hesitate to check regularly with the person, asking about which alter is in control at the moment and what would be their preferences for gender-based pronouns and names that they want to be called. As we mentioned in different parts of this episode, many stigmas and mistaken beliefs about dissociative identity neurotype have gone viral through media, especially movies and TV shows. Therefore, during our next episode, we start to critically discuss the representation and misrepresentation of dissociative identity neurotype in some of the most known movies and TV shows.